Well, what's up everybody? If you remember back to the last video, I showed you where the boys got about a dozen chickens. We got to get a place set up for them outside. So today we're going to be working on that. Most importantly, I'm going to be showing you one technique that I use to cut a rafter for a gable roof, which is actually the kind of roof we're going to be putting on this 10 by 10 chain link dog kennel that I've got behind me, where we're going to put our chickens. But before we get started, all of this behind me that's now fairly cleaned up, we've got to get the tractor out and the chainsaw out and get all of that cleaned up, because 2 days ago it didn't look like this at all. So let's get cleaned up and join me back here for Rafters 101. Okay, so it is absolutely always something. It doesn't matter what you're doing, you're gonna run into problems. So I've been working with chainsaw this morning, tractor, trying to pull trees out, trying to get all of this cleared out back here. We're gonna put our chicken pen right here, kind of in front of that old log truck, until I can get it moved out. But in the meantime, I've been battling this tire on the tractor for a couple of months now, leaking down all the time. I've already put air in it twice today, but it is not holding now, and you can see it's got a massive hole here, and somebody's put a tube in and the tube's got a hole in it. So it's time for the tire to come off, and we are going to take it to the tire shop, get that changed and taken care of. So I have got a mamma jamma of a 4-way wrench over here. I'm hoping that I can bust these lug nuts loose. Oh yeah. We're gonna get the new one put on just like, well, another day, another dollar. All right, come up to this one and wait before you pull the trigger. Now.
Why is it split? gotten mud everywhere.
It's rust because they've been sitting out in the rain. Hold on, it's not lined up. Finger off the trigger. Go ahead. All right. Looks a little wonky now. This tire is definitely worse for the wear. Okay, so this is the area that we've been trying to get cleaned up, and several passes with a flail mower on the back of the tractor. Gotten it cleaned up pretty good. So you can look out back this way. I run that mower through here. Yeah, I've got a bunch of, you know, stemmy stuff left to pick up. But honestly, the stobs aren't bad. I love that mower, with the exception of the fact that I have already shredded some brand new belts on it. So it is belt driven, which is kind of a pain. But I mean, all of this was just briars. And I mean, you can just tell it just mulches it up. So there's not a stem of briar left out here hardly. 2 or 3 days worth of work. I've gotten this cleared out, and we're wanting to put the chicken pen right there. So I still got a bunch to clean up, but I think we're ready to go get this 10 by 10 dog kennel. Okay everyone, so we are finally ready to start adding rafters, or cutting the rafters I should say. And so we're going to be cutting what's called a gable roof. And a gable roof is probably what a lot of people are familiar with. It's simply shaped like that, or a V at the top. And so basically you've got this V at the top, and then those rafters that you're cutting are the boards going up on each side. So there'll be 2 rafters to make one complete unit across the top of the roof. And then those rafters will be sitting across the top of your wall here. So basically your rafter would sit down here, have a notch cut out. They would join at the top, typically with a ridge, and would sit similar to that. And I'm going to show all that as we go. The most important part cutting gable rafters is you've got to know the outside width of the structure that you're trying to cover. This distance is known as the span. In this case, our chicken pen has a 10-foot span. Well, that's going to be very important for us in cutting our rafters, because 1/2 of that span is covered with a single rafter and the other half is covered with another rafter. So essentially, we're taking a single triangular roof section here that is the top of the roof with a bottom across it here, which is a long triangle. We're actually cutting that triangle in half when we calculate rafters. So what you're left with are 2 right triangles. You have one here, and you have the inverse of that over on the other side. And with those right triangles, you can start to calculate a couple of distances. So first, if our original span across was 10 feet, then half of that distance is 5 feet. And that's what we're going to need to know with our rafter calculation. So rafter length is determined by 1/2 of the span. So span divided by 2 gives us 5. So the pitch of the roof, all this amounts to is rise and run. So roof pitches or slopes are often denoted as 4 and 12, 6 and 12, 8 and 12, 10 and 12. And sometimes you'll see a symbol that kind of looks like this, where you'll have maybe a 6 here and a 12 here. What that's telling you is 6 inches of rise for every 12 inches of run. Well, with this information, we can actually calculate this leg of the triangle. We actually know the center point of our roof, how high it will be, using our pitch or our slope. So let's look at that real quick, and let's just say we're doing a 4 and 12. So 4 inches of rise, 12 inches of run. So if we know we're running 5 feet, there are 12 inches in 1 foot, so that is going to be 5 4-inch rises. All you've got to do is take the length here, 5 feet, times the inches of rise per foot. 5 times 4 is 20 inches. So that will be our total rise in the center of our structure 20 inches tall. What we're actually going to be doing for our roof is a 6 and 12 slope, which means over the distance of 5 feet, 6 inches times 5 is 30. We will have a 30-inch rise to the very center of our roof. That 1/2 span number, in our case 5, is the number of steps that we're going to make with a rafter square, which we'll get to in a minute. The first thing we need to do is calculate our first line on the board, which is we'll set the angle for the entire rafter. So what I'm going to be using today is a rafter angle square, more commonly called a speed square, useful for a lot of different applications. What we're looking at for gable rafters, these are common. So a common rafter, here are our different markings. So I've got a 6 here, that's the one I want to use. What you're going to do is at the end of the board here, and you have a pivot point. This pivot point here, what you want to do is make sure that is locked securely on the edge of the board. So the square has this nice T-shape on the end where you hook the board on the side. You're going to hook that there. We're looking at this bottom line here. These are common cuts. What we're going to be using today is 6 and 12. This hash mark here for 6 needs to be directly over the edge of the board. This side of the square is at the correct slope now. All right, so what we're going to do is make a mark down that edge. So that is our starting angle. Okay, so after we have our initial angle laid off with a speed square, what I'm going to do is take a carpenter square or framing square, and we're going to use that to lay out or step off the rafter. So in this case, the number of steps that you're going to make with this square equals half the span of the distance you're trying to cover. So again, 10-foot span for our structure, that's 5 steps. Start at the 0 point of the square here. My rise, 6 inches, I've already marked. And then the long edge here, we're going to go out to 12, 6 and 12. When I put this down here, notice my line I've already started. That line on the square is directly perpendicular to the edge of the board. Swing this edge up to where 12 is directly over the edge of the board. We're going to mark the end of the board, and I always number them. That's number 1. So that is our first step, the distance from right here to right here. To continue this process, we're just going to work our way down the rafter and step that off using that method. Okay, so once you have this 5th step made, this is the end of the run here. What's important to note is which end of the rafter you're on. And the way that I like to lay out rafters is I want to lay out where I'm starting at the ridge. And so the ridge is the pinnacle or the very center of our roof here. So this being the ridge here, I want to start at this point working down. And what you got to keep in mind is when this line is cut, is that this line is actually going to be perpendicular to the ground. That cut is now this line. And so what we're working on is the rest of the rafter by laying out our steps. We are now at the plumb line or the plumb cut. I'm going to switch back to my speed square, and with 6 showing here and my pivot here, I'm actually going to slide this square up to my mark, and I'm going to draw that line. Here's the corner of your wall. Your rafter is coming here down to here. You've got an overhang. This cut that we just made at the end of our last and final step, our 5th step, is right here. So if we cut this line, we essentially cut a rafter that is the exact length of the building and has no overhang. Well, you need an overhang because that's what's going to help shed water away from the structure, especially on a house. This is known as the plumb cut, where you are now plumb and perfectly straight with the side of the wall. What we need to do next is add the overhang to the distance on the rafter. I want a 6-inch overhang. So what I'm going to do is take my square and I'm going to get it right on the edge of that line so that I know that this is a right angle going out. And I'm going to mark 6 inches right here on the edge of that board. Take the speed square, lay it out on 6 and 12, and trace that line. Once this rafter is put in position, this distance from the wall to the tail here, that will be 6 inches. If you take a tape measure, you're actually going to come up short when this rafter is stood into place. You have to measure 90 degrees out from your plumb line because at this point, everything is at an angle. So next thing we have to do is commonly referenced as a bird's mouth, and it consists of 2 different cuts. You've got your plumb cut here, and then also you've got what's called the seat cut, where the rafter itself can rest on the wall depending on the width of board you're using. In our case, we're using a 2x4, which is 3.5 inches wide. I usually always come up 1.5 inches. Has to be at a right angle to this line. So I'm going to put my 1.5 inch mark right over the edge of the board, and I'm simply going to trace the other side. This is now my seat cut and plumb cut, which total adds up to the bird's mouth. So once this section is cut out here, it allows your rafter to sit on the wall. You will have an overhang here on the side of 6 inches out, and then we have our ridge cut at the end. The last thing that we want to consider is, if we cut this line off here, leave the rafter the exact same length it is, what we have done is created 2 rafters that are simply going to butt together at the top. They're just going to hit each other just like these two do, and that will work. But what we want to do is, in the very center of our roof, we are going to have a ridge, and this ridge board will be a 2x6 or 2x8 that runs lengthwise down the roof, and each rafter then attaches to it, and then they will each nail to that ridge. And so the ridge then will continue to the next rafter. What we have to take into account for is the thickness of this ridge, because again, right now our rafters are butting together in the middle. Well, we're actually going to subtract wood out to allow for that ridge. Again, this will be a 2x6, 2x8, 2x10, and any 2x framing member is 1.5 inches thick. So what we want to do is we want to take 1.5 inches out of the center of our 2 rafters. So 1/2 inch is 3/4. You're going to take 3/4 inch and subtract it from this rafter. You're going to take 3/4 inch and subtract it from this rafter. And then once your bird's mouths are positioned on each side of the wall, when your rafters are laid into place like they should, you will have 1.5 inch gap between them, which will then allow for the placement of your ridge. I'm going to come off of that line 3/4 inch. And again, I want to do that square to the line. Keep this along the edge of the line. I'm going to mark 3/4 here to 6 and 12 slope. This is our new line. This will be half the thickness of the ridge here. The other rafter will account for the other half of the ridge, and that's where that board will go. So we're actually going to be cutting this portion away. You can see here I completed my cuts for the bird's mouth, the plumb cut and the seat cut with the circular saw. Because of the curvature of the blade, notice how the cut is actually incomplete on the bottom. You'll need to finish that up with a handsaw. Okay, and so this will be our completed rafter here. For the opposite side, obviously we'll just take another rafter cut just like this, flip it around, and the angles will line up. Now, you can also use Pythagoreans Theorem. And so Pythagoreans Theorem is with 3 sides of a triangle, with C being the long diagonal edge. It's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And you're solving for C, or any leg of the angle for that matter. So we know that the bottom line, let's just call that A on our triangle, was 5 feet. Well, that's 60 inches. So we'd put 60 in there because we want all our units the same. If we're using feet, use feet. If you're using inches, use inches. So we're going to do 60 inches. We know that our rise going up was going to be 30 inches to the ridge, or to the center line of our roof. So 30 goes in for B. You've got 60 squared plus 30 squared. You're going to take the square root of that to solve for C, and that will give you the length of the rafter from the ridge down into your plumb cut for your tail. It's not going to account for the overhang. You will then add that to that line. So a lot of people think that's a lot easier way to do it. I just always step them off with a carpenter square. It works for me. It's less math. And doing Pythagoreans Theorem, you've also got to be able to convert decimals into fractions for an inch, which isn't that difficult, and you're going to get it within a 1/16 or an 1/8 anyway. And so you'll notice on ours, it worked out to be 67 inches. When I pulled a tape on it, we were within 1/4 inch. And what you got to keep in mind is we subtracted off the 3/4 of an inch for the ridge, half the ridge. That's not going to be included when you use Pythagoreans Theorem. So any changes to your rafter length, such as taking off for the ridge or adding on for the overhang, you've got to take into account for after using that method. So if we add that 3/4 back on to the measurement we got on our rafter, you're going to come in at like 67.5. So we're a 1/2 inch off on our rafter, and yeah, that'd be a big deal if I was building a house probably, but for a chicken pen, I don't know. So where did we lose that 1/2 inch? Probably in the thickness of our Sharpie. So me using a Sharpie so that the camera could see it on the lines leaves a lot of room for error on layout with a rafter, because you don't know exactly where that 6 and 12 mark was with a Sharpie. Sharpie thickness is about 3/16 thick of ink, and then of course if it sits longer, it bleeds and makes a wider spot on the board. So over the course of 5 steps with that square, that's 5 or 6 Sharpie marks indicating the length, and you could easily get up to a 1/2 inch off if those lines are really thick and your square is not exactly where you marked it with. So lay yours out with a pencil. A fine line is a good line, and you should come up a little more accurate. So 2 different methods to do it. Use Pythagoreans Theorem, step it off with a framing square. It really doesn't matter, just pick one that works for you, and once you get a rafter that works, then use that as a pattern to lay on top of all your other boards, get them all cut out. And so in this case, we're gonna need, I think, 12 rafters. So our pin is 10 foot long as well as 10 foot wide. I'm gonna do a 2 foot center, which means I'm gonna space my rafters 2 feet apart. To do that, simply take the length of your wall, for instance, 10 feet, divide it by the spacing you want. Well, I'm gonna space them every 2 feet. That's 5 rafters. However, you didn't count the first one. So you always add 1. When you're calculating studs for walls, rafters for roofs, it's always +1. So you got to bring a friend with you. You can calculate all you want to, but you got to have somewhere to start. So if you're starting at 2 feet, that means you don't have a rafter back here at 0. So you've got 5 rafters over 10 feet, +1 at the beginning. We need 6 for each side. That's 12 rafters, 67 inches long, plus a 6 inch overhang, minus 3/4 for half the ridge, and it's all math. But my next few afternoons are booked solid, got a lot of work to do, got things going on. So you're actually gonna have to tune in to the next video to see this completed chicken pen. I know we've been working on it for 2 videos. You'd think, man, can't you just go out there in one day and do it? No, I've got grass to cut. I work 8 hours a day before I can come home and even begin to film or work on all the projects around the house. So be sure to leave a comment below. What do you think about this rafter technique? Do you do it different than this? Does this actually help you out? Drop a comment below what you want to see. Drop a comment below what you thought about this technique. Hope you enjoyed the video. We'll catch you next time with a finished chicken pen right here on the J-Line.